When somebody says to you, as an artist, if somebody says to you, I am dealing with the elemental building blocks of reality, you can't really then say, oh, I'm just going to finish this still life drawing and then I'll be with you. It seemed at the time like a ridiculous break between vast installations that were to do with my mum's dementia. She would say, you remind me of my son. So something was slipping. It wasn't breaking, but it was slipping. And that was horrifying, really, to watch, but in a sort of weird kind of artistic way, also quite interesting. And so the idea of the mind and how the mind works and how the mind processes information was a big driver of earlier work. How did I end up getting involved in the physics? And are there connections? The answer is yes. There are connections, ridiculous connections. I just knew that I was interested in being less crazily. The installations I was doing based on my mum's dementia were vast. They required van loads of stuff to be taken to venues. So it had become massively overblown. And I was looking for a reason to edit and pare down. And when you meet somebody like Kostas, my physicist, Professor Kostas Nikopolis, who says I'm exposing the building blocks of reality. It's the smallest things you can possibly get without subdividing further. You think, oh, okay, that's encouraging because I could do that. I could start, editing down. So that was the driver, really. And when he started telling me about quarks and leptons and the forces that operate between them, it kept reminding me of drawing. Everything he said about the particles, by transferring the word particles to drawing, it seemed to fit. He would talk about the forces operating between them. And, when I'm drawing, I'm very conscious that, as a line becomes a shape, different forces start to operate. As the shape becomes tonally developed, different forces start to operate. So he'd be going on about, particles decaying and energy and mass transferring one to the other, and I'd be going on about shapes turning into other shapes and lines, points becoming lines. And it just seemed like this was a significant correspondence that was occurring here. As I tried to make drawings which Kostas could understand why certain things look the way they do. There's an equivalence in the visual forces and the visual elements to the particle forces. Yes, I've gone off on my own way because the visual forces are different to the forces that create the universe. But I wanted there to be almost a musical score-like connection so that he could buy into why the drawings look the way they do. It was called the Sketchbook and the Collider because one of the things that we laughingly joked about was that particle physics requires colossal machines, billions of dollars, because to get at these tiny little things, you have to have enormous energies and you have to have ridiculously large machines. CERN is 27 kilometers, 100 meters deep, and the detectors are sort of like, hence my huge drawings at Devon. And so we joked, and he said, what I do in the Collider is I hurl these things together at enormous energies and see what happens. And I laughed at him and I said, well, you just described an artist's use of a sketchbook. Well, certainly you described my use of a sketchbook. You're bunging things in there. Chuck me that sketchbook over.
This one?
Well, anyone will do. This idea that there are pages being stuck in, there are pages being ripped out, the order is being reconfigured. In order for it to make sense, to try and although it seemed ridiculous, it also seemed incredibly appropriate. It all comes down to the early part of the 20th century when Cubism is the big bang of modern art, and Einstein's one of Einstein's paper, not the relativity paper, bizarrely, which gave us sort of astrophysics basically, but one of the papers that looked at the photons of light led to quantum mechanics. So the late 1800s, when they discovered the electron and the X-ray and all that sort of thing, through to about 1910 is the kind of key period. So I always go back to that artistically for Cubism, which is the which is where it all comes from, really. And how much Picasso and Braque knew about scientific things is an ongoing debate. There's a guy called Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who is a very well-known neuroscientist. He spans the period we were talking about. He's I think he died in the 50s. He was born in 18 something or other. He sort of invented neuroscience. But he wanted to be an artist, but his dad wouldn't let him. But he made discoveries about the brain by slicing bits of brain and then putting them under the microscope, having worked out a way of improving the dyeing of them. And he took photographs, so he developed his own photographs when photography was like only just been invented, so he was fascinated by that. And then he made lots of drawings, trying to work out how the brain worked. And some of his discoveries, for which he won the Nobel Prize, about the direction of information flowing down the neuronal connections, he discovered by drawing. That's what fascinates me about him. And the drawings are fabulous anyway. I mean, they're gorgeous drawings. The surrealists were all over it. The workshops started almost before I'd done much work on the project and turned out to be the approach I adopted. So we tried. Costas uses me as an outreach tool, let's be honest. He sees art as a way of getting physics to people who wouldn't normally be interested in physics. I see physics as a way of getting art to scientists who wouldn't normally think about art. So we have two different agendas that dovetail. I've always been interested in not sticking to where you're supposed to stick to. The interesting thing happens on the boundaries between things. So I'm very worried about people saying, well, I'm an artist and I'm a scientist and I'm a geographer and I'm a historian and I'm a whatever. There should be fluidity of everything, it seems to me. Fluidity is the thing. And that's what strikes you about particle physics. It's a constant fluid process. It's not a sort of, oh, it's this particle or it's that particle. It's a constant choreography of activity. And my interest is always in doing the workshops and the exhibitions is always to say to people, look, you've got a particle physicist working with an artist. That shouldn't be thought of as odd at all. What Costas and I try and do when we do workshops, what you want is not to be encouraging people to be scientists or artists. You want them to be creatively curious. And then they will solve problems, whether it's an artistic problem or a science problem or whatever. That's what you're trying to do with these workshops. Not enough if you listen to some of my colleagues who say that I'm too worried about the science, taking too long to make artistic improvements and developments and so on and so forth. And I should worry less about the science and more about pushing the art, to which I say I want to be respectful to my particle physicist colleague. I want to understand more. I don't want to rush and make things which are just inspired by, rather than have some understanding to them.